All right, there's no other comments. We're going to move on to our last presentation, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Ginny Barbour. Ginny is the editor-in-chief currently of the Medical Journal of Australia. She was previously the director of Open Access Australasia. She's an adjunct professor at the Queensland University of Technology. She trained in medicine at Cambridge University and then specialised in haematology. She joined the Lancet in 1999 and she was one of the founding editors of PLOS Medicine. So she's a real expert in the field. She's going to talk about a complex relationship, the role of journals in supporting and building reviewer capacity in a time of academic overload. Ginny.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thank you for the introduction. It's lovely to talk to everybody today and to hear what's going on. I've been frantically taking notes. I really hope that we're going to look forward to getting some of the links. Nick, of course, was my predecessor at the MJA, and I've been sort of it's been great fun working there and great fun sort of kind of building on what Nick did there. So I realised that we are late, so I actually have got not a lot of slides, but I would really like us to have a bit of a conversation about this, because I think the challenge that we have right now is that, you know, we've heard it from all the speakers today about the peer review is such an important part of what we do at journals. Maybe it doesn't look exactly like what we started with when we first did peer review, but one of the challenges we have is that we know that peer reviewers are highly prized and not necessarily valued perhaps in the way that they need to be, and they are increasingly scarce as these journals increase. So I'm just going to quickly just take you through my approach at the MJA. So this is something that I came up with when we first when I first took over, because I sometimes feel like one of the things that we do at journals is we feel like we are it's a sort of bit of trying to keep people out. You know, there's a bit of a kind of when you're triaging thousands of papers a year, it can often feel like you're a bit under siege. And sometimes, I don't know, you sort of get this mentality between editors and academics that you're trying to keep those papers out. So one of the things I really tried to kind of emphasize is the importance of a respectful process. And I think that kind of also needs to extend to peer reviewers. And we'll all be very familiar with peer reviewers who have actually kind of done reviews that are maybe a bit sarcastic, or sometimes they can be downright rude. I've had some ones that have actually been really, really unacceptable, and we haven't been able to pass them on. So I think that one of the key things for me is having a really proper culture around the processes at journals, and that extends to the peer reviewers. Because, you know, we really need peer reviewers, and I mean, I'll come on to them just on a couple of examples of where things are sort of changing this space, but you know, we really need them. You know, they're absolutely at the heart of what we do. It's part of the quality control that happens at journals, you know, starts at the very beginning when papers come in, and extends to, you know, sometimes a really complex peer review that we ask our reviewers to do, particularly, you know, methodologists and statisticians. And I think there's a, you know, a bit of a question to be asked about, you know, how much are they really worth? So this is just at the MJA. I mean, I use this slide sometimes when I'm talking to authors, because you all know this. When you go out and talk to authors, they often think there's this kind of black box that they throw their papers into, and they have no idea what happens in that process. Peer review is just one part of it, and it's a bit that happens in the middle, as we know. But one of my views about peer review is actually the entire process, from when it first comes into the journal staff through to, you know, the editorial assessment, through to where our deputy editors work at it, that's all part of peer review. That's essentially a quality control process. Last year at the MJA, we invited more than 4,000 external reviewers. We sent out about 400 papers for review. 1,200 of those accepted. That does include some that reviewed for us multiple times. And the challenge, of course, is, you know, just ensuring that those reviewers are able to do their job in a way that kind of works for us, but also works for them. There's some banging in the background. Can I just check that that's not affecting how people are hearing what I'm saying? Is that okay?
Seems okay, Ginny.
All right, good. It's annoying me more than it's annoying you. Okay, so, you know, right there in the middle, you know, one thing we know is that journals have a relatively small number of staff, or, you know, volunteers that are actually running the journals, but just look at the enormous number of peer reviewers that are kind of needed to keep the whole thing going. And actually, we can estimate it. So I think one of the previous speakers mentioned this paper, and I found it a really interesting one. It's from 3 authors, including Alex Holcomb, who's based at the University of Sydney. And they looked at both the number of reviews that were done, but also try to put a dollar cost on it. And I think this is something that we need to be really mindful of as journal editors, that increasingly there is this understanding from reviewers that they are providing a service that it has immense value. So this is from papers in 2020. So 4.7 million submissions accepted up to peer review. Total number of peer reviews in all of this was around 21 million. The hours of labour spent reviewing these papers was 130 million. And if you actually put that into what was the cost of doing that, if you base it on, the various salaries that kind of were associated with it, it comes out to indeed $1.5 billion. And, the authors make the case this is actually kind of a donation to the publishing system. And, we do pay some peer reviewers, but that's rare. So there's an enormous amount of free labour that goes into the whole system at the moment. And this is just a paper that literally from this week was published in Nature. And it talks about the way that peer reviewers are overwhelming academics, not just from the point of view of journals, but increasingly at really complex grant review systems. And there's a really interesting story that kind of kicks it off when it talks about if you're looking for people who are reviewing the need to be to actually do experiments on really complex machines, all of those have to be peer reviewed as well. And I think sometimes as journal editors, we forget the fact that the peer reviewers that we are calling on to do the review for our journals are also often heavily involved in peer review of grant applications, and those are even more complex. And one of the things that research funding agencies are finding that out is even if they pay those reviewers, they are still finding it really hard to get reviewers for their papers. And I think this is a quote I pulled from the paper, and I think you've probably heard this from your reviewers as well, which is a lot of reviewers feel that they are providing a free service that turns commercial publishers turn into profits. And I think that I do hear that not infrequently. So what do we do offer now? We payment sometimes. I mean, there's arguments back and forth about whether payment is actually a valuable thing to do. And I know there are services that advertise peer reviewers that peer reviewers can apply to, and then those peer reviewers are paid to do peer review. I don't know what the success of those is, and I haven't seen that systematically implemented at the journals that I'm involved with. We do often pay statistician or methodologists, and that's sometimes I think because essentially the work that they're doing is more of a service rather than them getting much out of the paper itself by finding seeing an early interesting finding. Sven talked about the reviewer credits that the program that he's running, and of course many of us will be familiar with Publons, which I think for a lot of us when it first came, and I was one of the chairs I was the chair of COPE when Publons was sort of kind of going around the place, and I think at that time we sort of hoped it would solve a problem for us. It would really help us with understanding and rewarding reviewers. What we found, unfortunately, I think, was that there was a lot of gaming of the system, and I think that academics lost kind of fell out of love with it. And then of course it's now part of Clarivate Web of Science, and I think again for many academics that's an example of kind of a great startup that's now been built into the sort of large commercial publishing industry. So the thing that just to note is, and I think it's just also worth bearing in mind, and again, previous speakers have talked about this, is the role of peer reviewers is changing. So we're no longer having just this process that we have, for example, at the MJ, where we have double anonymous peer review, which all happens before publication. We have F1000, which has been experimenting with this model for really quite a long time. And they have this model that you post a preprint and you can have reviews on top of it. eLife is doing a great deal of work in thinking about different models of peer review, and as we know, that has affected how they are currently included in databases. I'm really interested in MetaRaw, which came out of a number of organisations, but Rory, the Research Institute in the UK, and AMOS, the Association of Interdisciplinary Meta Research and Open Science, which again has this publish, review, curate process. And it reminds me, seeing this, about what happened when PLOS One happened, where a lot of people jumped into this. Well, people jumped into a really experimental model. I think we're yet to see how much really big uptake this gets. But I think personally, in the same way that I really love the concept of bibliodiversity, multiple models of journals and publishing models. I think biblio peer review, whatever, or diversity in peer review is something we should welcome and not kind of be closed to when we're thinking, even if we're doing it in relatively traditional journals. Because I mean, the other thing that I think is really interesting is trust in reviewers is changing. I was really interested in the talks just now about AI and what that's meaning for us. The problem of paper mills, the problem of fake journals. All of this is, you know, a lot of these fake journals rely on their for their credibility on the kind of peer review that, you know, we talk about. And one of the things that we definitely know happens is that peer review can be completely subverted in these processes. You can see fake peer reviews arising. You see review cartels happening where and some of these paper mill journals actually kind of sell citations as part of their business model. So review is, as it currently stands, is also under threat from some of these new models that are emerging. So I want to kind of I want to end sort of relatively early and just see if we can have a conversation around what our responsibility is to reviewers nowadays. So I think that I think we have to use our reviewers wisely. So one of the biggest frustrations I hear from reviewers is that, you know, they get sent a paper and they go, well, why on earth was I asked to review this? This paper wasn't even necessarily in scope for your journal. It's clearly got a very obvious methodological flaw. You know, it wasn't worth my time. And I think we have to be incredibly mindful of that. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to do at the MJA, is being much stricter about what we actually send to the peer reviewers. Joey gave some fantastic examples of, you know, the training that he's doing. I'm really keen to build on that. I've started doing some of that at the MJ. We have reviewer guidelines now. I spend time working with particularly early career researchers. I talk a lot to them about peer review and help them talk about how that might work. We haven't yet expanded it in the way that I'd like to, but that's kind of on my to-do list for shortly. And I'm going to put my hat on as one of the co-chairs of DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. We all know there's a huge amount going on in research assessment globally with a number of different initiatives. And one of the key things that we absolutely have to do is to reward all the many outputs of research. And that includes the peer review and the informal peer review and the mentoring that kind of happens in that process. And as yet, it is not yet built into really systems of assessment and reward. So I will stop there. I'd love to have a conversation. You know, how do we support and value reviewers? What should we be doing?
Thank
Thanks.
you, Ginny. I'll see if I can open this up for comments and questions. I guess I'd like to hear what people have to think as well, if people would like to comment or like to raise their hands. I know it's hard online compared to being in person, but hopefully we'll be able to follow up on some of these ideas for next year in Manila for APAME 2026, because it seems to me this issue won't be going away in the next 12 months, and we'll have plenty to cover. Jenny, isn't the real problem the volume of submissions? Isn't this really the problem?
Yeah, look, I think I think it's really interesting, and one of the things that's happening with the volume of submissions is that actually I bet other journals too are getting many more submissions that I think are coming probably written by AI, written by paper mills, and that are coming in and they're sort of almost bombarding journals just to kind of see what sticks. So I do think one of the jobs of journals is to be really good at kind of just getting the papers that you're never going to publish out the door really quickly and not spending any time on them. If the volume gets, you know, I don't know, goes up by 2 orders of magnitude, I'm not sure what I'll be saying then. But I do think that as editors, we know the papers we want to publish. We know the kind of things that we want to do. And so our job, I think, is to have a really efficient system for, you know, sorting that, getting those papers and assessing the ones that you actually really want peer reviewers to look at. So I think, yes, the volume is a problem, but I think actually having a really good quality control system is probably helps address that.
And maybe some training for editors, you know, who are struggling with this might be something APAME could think about for
I'd
next.
love to discuss that actually, because I think there are some things that we can definitely do. And actually, you know, AI can kind of help with some of that. So for example, if you'll get, you know, one of the things that we know that happens is if you get papers that are coming in, which are coming from problematic author groups, that can be flagged through systems that kind of scan for that. So there is some level of technology that can help here.
No, I think that's right. But so it's incredibly important, and I hope we can all learn from each other how to do this. I'm just looking for any more hands or hands that might be up, because I realize we've had a long afternoon, but a very good afternoon. and I've thoroughly enjoyed everything we've covered. Ginny, look, I think what we might do is plan to have a session at, well, I'm not in charge of this fully, but the committee will have to decide. But I would propose we have a session on these issues in Manila, because to me it seems like an area that would be fertile for us to cover, and also perhaps publish along these lines about what, some guidance perhaps, or have encourage others to do so. I think that would be a way forward as
Sounds good.
we try to address all these complex issues.